He didn't go directly to heaven. Jesus stayed here for 40 days. He had 3 things to do before leaving.
And he appeared an 11th time. But this isn't written in the Bible. These words came from the mouth of Samuel Bennett, a 5-year-old boy in Williamsburg, Virginia. He'd never been to Sunday school. He couldn't even read yet. But on Easter Sunday, 2010, he stood up in church and described events from 2,000 years ago that aren't written in any biblical text. This is his story. And it begins that morning when church bells echoed through the colonial streets of Williamsburg. Sunday morning, April 4th, 2010. Church bells echoed through the historic streets of Williamsburg, Virginia. It was Easter Sunday, and the small town was filled with faithful tourists and locals, just like every year. Colonial-style houses, white picket fences, cobblestone roads. Everything felt like it was from 300 years ago. When the heavy doors of Bruton Parish Church opened, hundreds of people flooded inside. This church, standing since 1715, was one of America's oldest houses of worship. White columns, wooden pews, golden light filtering through stained glass windows. The atmosphere was sacred and peaceful. In the back rows, 5-year-old Samuel Bennett sat next to his grandmother Rose. His little legs didn't reach the floor, his feet dangling in the air. His brown eyes curiously scanned the surroundings. Grandma Rose, 73 years old, was a thin and fragile woman. Her white hair was tied in a bun, prayer beads in her hand, deep wrinkles on her face. She was raising Samuel alone. The child's mother had died during childbirth, and he never knew his father. Father Thomas Sullivan, a 60-year-old priest with white hair, stepped up to the pulpit. His voice was deep and authoritative. Beloved congregation, today we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. 3 days after dying on the cross, he rose from the tomb and... Right then, Samuel stood up. Grandma Rose whispered, "Sammy, please sit down." But Samuel didn't sit. His small voice echoed in the church's silence. He didn't go directly to heaven. Movement in the church stopped. Hundreds of heads turned. Father Thomas cut off his sermon, furrowing his brow. "Child, please sit down." But Samuel continued. His voice was no longer childish. It was deep, serious, beyond his years. Jesus stayed here for 40 days. He had 3 things to do before leaving, and he appeared an 11th time. But this isn't written in the Bible. The church's atmosphere changed. Some coughed, others whispered. Grandma Rose pulled Samuel's arm, trying to make him sit, her face bright red. "Sammy, enough! What are you saying?" Samuel looked at her, tears welling up, and continued. He appeared to Mary Magdalene in a cave. He told her a secret. God's kingdom isn't in heaven, it's inside every person. Right then, someone from the front row stood up, approximately 65 years old, gray-haired, wearing glasses. Professor James Mitchell, a history professor at the College of William and Mary. He'd been studying early Christianity for 40 years, and what he just heard was impossible. Father Thomas raised his hand to maintain control. "Congregation, please remain calm. The child is just a bit excited." But Professor Mitchell stepped forward, his voice trembling but determined. "Wait, did you hear what the child said? The 11th appearance. Mary Magdalene. This isn't even in apocryphal texts." Panic started in the church. People whispered, some stood up. Grandma Rose pulled Samuel by the arm, trying to get him outside. But Professor Mitchell ran after them. "Please wait, I need to talk." In the church courtyard, the sun was shining. Grandma Rose, holding Samuel tightly, walked quickly. Professor Mitchell caught up. "Mrs. Bennett, isn't it? Please, just 5 minutes." Rose turned, her voice harsh and protective. "Professor, my grandson is 5 years old. He doesn't know what he's saying. He must have heard something on television." "No," Mitchell said firmly. "Those details aren't on television. The 11th appearance theory is only discussed in academic circles. A 5-year-old child can't know this. Rose paused. She pressed her hands to her chest. What do you want? Just to talk. Tomorrow at your home, 10 minutes. I promise I won't harm the child. Rose looked at Samuel. The child was calm now, watching butterflies, as if what just happened never occurred. Okay, Rose said, but only 10 minutes. The next morning, Professor Mitchell knocked on the door. He had a voice recorder under his arm, a notebook in his hand. Grandma Rose opened the door, worry on her face. Come in, but please don't frighten him. Samuel was sitting on the living room carpet, playing with small cars. Mitchell sat down, opened his notebook. Hello, Samuel. I'm Professor Mitchell. Can I talk with you? Samuel lifted his head, smiled. Hello. You were at church yesterday? Yes, correct. Samuel, I have questions about what you said about Jesus yesterday. Who taught you these things? Samuel shook his head. Nobody taught me, I remember. Mitchell raised his eyebrows. You remember? From where? Samuel put down his car, closed his eyes. When I sleep at night, I see things, but they're not dreams. They're like windows. Windows opening to another time. Mitchell's heartbeat quickened. In his 40-year career, he'd never heard anything like this. He pressed record. Samuel, I'm going to ask you a question now. Very important. You said Jesus stayed here for 40 days. You said he had 3 things to do. What were they? Samuel opened his eyes, as if looking at a distant place. First, he had to prove he was real. People had to touch him, see him, watch him eat. That's why he showed Thomas his wounds. Mitchell took notes. This was correct. It was written in the Bible. The second, Samuel's voice changed, became deeper. Second, there were things he had to teach them. But this knowledge couldn't be written. It could only be transferred, from heart to heart. Mitchell's hand trembled. This concept existed in Gnostic texts, but how could a child know this? And the third, tears welled up in Samuel's eyes. Third, he had to say goodbye to his mother, Mary. That was the hardest. He didn't want to leave her, but he had to go. He waited until the 40th day, until his mother said, I'm ready, you can go. Tears streamed from Mitchell's eyes. This detail wasn't in any text, but it was so human, so real. Samuel, he said with a trembling voice, you were there, weren't you? Samuel nodded. Yes, but not as Samuel, as someone else, someone who walked with him. And then, without warning, Samuel opened his mouth and made strange guttural sounds. The words weren't English, harsh, ancient, a lost language. Mitchell froze. He recognized those sounds. He'd been studying them for 40 years. This was Aramaic, he whispered. You're speaking first-century Galilean Aramaic. Samuel stopped, opened his eyes, looked confused. What did I say? Mitchell checked the voice recording, his hands shaking. You said, the teacher walks among us, but our eyes don't see him. Blessed are those who believe without seeing. Grandma Rose ran from the kitchen. What's happening? Why are you crying? Mitchell stood up, turned off the voice recorder. Mrs. Bennett, your grandson is speaking Aramaic, a language spoken 2,000 years ago, and he's doing it in a dialect that nobody could have taught him. Rose's knees trembled. She collapsed into a chair. This isn't possible. Sammy hasn't even gone to school yet. Mitchell pulled out his card from his pocket. Mrs. Bennett, I need to suggest something. We need to take this child to the head priest of Bruton Parish, Father Thomas Sullivan. He needs to see this. Rose shook her head. No, don't touch him. He's just a child. I know, Mitchell said in a soft voice. But if this is real, and I believe it is, then this child is carrying a 2,000-year-old secret, and the world needs to hear it. That evening, Father Thomas Sullivan came to Rose Bennett's home. 60 years old, serious-faced, but compassionate. He'd been a priest for 35 years and had seen every kind of miracle claim. Most were fake. He sat with Samuel in the living room. The priest, in a calm but testing manner, asked, "Samuel, I'm going to ask you about Jesus' 20th day. 20 days after the resurrection. What happened? There's no record of this day in the Bible." Samuel closed his eyes, remained silent for a long time. Then he began to speak. Early morning, Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus goes alone. He's returning to the place where he suffered, where he sweated blood. Father Thomas leaned forward. Why is he going back? Because he has to remember. He has to remember the pain. He kneels there and cries. What is he crying for? Samuel's voice broke. He's crying for the future, because he knows that people will build golden temples in his name, but forget the hungry. They'll wage wars in his name, but he only taught love. His message will be lost, and every generation will have to choose again. Tears flowed from Father Thomas's eyes. He'd been a priest for 35 years. He'd given thousands of sermons. But these words, this pain, weren't something a child could make up. "Samuel," he said with a trembling voice, you really were there, weren't you?" Samuel nodded. "Yes, Father, and I need to tell you something else." "What is it?" He asked Peter 4 questions. Only 3 are in the Bible. He asked, "Do you love me?" 3 times. But there was also a 4th question. Father Thomas held his breath. What was the 4th question? He asked, "Can you forgive yourself?" And Peter cried. Because that's the hardest question. Jesus told him, if you can't forgive yourself, how will you teach others to forgive? Father Thomas stood up, went to the window, pressed his hand against the glass. His shoulders were shaking. Then he turned. "Mrs. Bennett, Professor Mitchell, we need to take this child to Baltimore." Rose panicked. "Baltimore? Why?" "Because this is bigger than me. Archbishop Michael Brennan needs to see him, and there are scientists at Johns Hopkins. If this is real, it needs to be scientifically verified." Mitchell nodded. "I agree, but this is Mrs. Bennett's decision." Rose looked at Samuel. The child was calm again now, playing with his toy car, as if he hadn't just described 2,000 years ago. "Okay," Rose finally said, "but I'm coming too. I won't leave him alone." 3 days later, Wednesday morning, April 7, 2010, 3 people waited at the Greyhound bus terminal. Grandma Rose held a small bag. Samuel sat next to her, looking out the window. Professor Mitchell had bought 3 tickets, Williamsburg to Baltimore, a 3.5-hour journey. As the bus departed, Rose quietly counted her prayer beads. Mitchell wrote something in his notebook. Samuel just looked out the window, as if toward a distant place, somewhere no one else could see. As the bus passed through the Virginia countryside, Samuel whispered, "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart." "In Baltimore, things will change. People won't believe me, but then they will. And then I'll forget." Rose's heart tightened. "What do you mean you'll forget?" Samuel smiled. It was a sad smile. "God chose me only to speak, not to remember." Mitchell turned to look. "Samuel, what will happen in Baltimore?" The child closed his eyes. "Science and faith will collide, and both will be surprised." The bus moved quickly, approaching the Maryland border, and little Samuel Bennett, a 5-year-old child, leaned against the window, eyes closed, carrying a 2,000-year-old secret. In Baltimore, at the Basilica of the National Shrine, Archbishop Michael Brennan was receiving a phone call. "Are you sure? A 5-year-old child is speaking Aramaic." "I understand. I'll be waiting for him." He hung up the phone, clasped his hands, prayed silently. "Lord, if this is your work, guide us." And at that moment, 230 miles away on a small bus, Samuel Bennett opened his eyes and whispered, "It's beginning." The Greyhound bus pulled into Baltimore's downtown terminal at 2:47 p.m. The city was massive compared to Williamsburg. Skyscrapers, traffic, the distant sound of sirens. Samuel pressed his face against the window, watching the urban chaos unfold. "We're here, sweetheart," Grandma Rose whispered, gathering their small bag. Professor Mitchell led them through the terminal and into a waiting taxi. "Basilica of the National Shrine," he told the driver. "Cathedral Street." The taxi wound through Baltimore's streets. Samuel watched silently as row houses gave way to historic buildings until finally, rising before them like a white marble vision, stood the basilica. Built in 1821, America's first cathedral was a neoclassical masterpiece. Massive white columns, a soaring dome, an atmosphere of power and ancient faith. Even Rose, worried as she was, gasped at its grandeur. "This is where we're meeting him?" she asked. "Archbishop Michael Brennan," Mitchell confirmed. Let's just say he's not easily impressed." Inside, the basilica's interior was breathtaking. Vaulted ceilings, marble floors, the smell of incense and old wood. A young priest met them at the entrance. "Professor Mitchell, the Archbishop is waiting in his study. Please follow me." They walked through stone corridors, past portraits of past bishops, until they reached a heavy wooden door. The priest knocked twice. "Enter." The voice was deep, commanding. They stepped inside. Archbishop Michael Brennan was 74 years old, tall even while seated, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. His face was weathered, serious, the face of a man who'd spent 5 decades in service to God and had seen every manner of fraud, delusion, and genuine faith. He stood, his gaze falling immediately on Samuel. "So," he said quietly, "this is the child." Samuel looked up at him without fear. For a moment, their eyes met, the old priest and the small boy, and something unspoken passed between them. "Please sit," the Archbishop said, his tone softening slightly. They sat in leather chairs facing his desk. Brennan folded his hands, his gaze never leaving Samuel. "Young man, do you know why you're here?" Samuel nodded. "Because people think I'm lying, but I'm not." "I didn't say you were lying, but I need to understand. Professor Mitchell tells me you speak Aramaic. You describe events from 2,000 years ago. Where does this knowledge come from?" "It's not knowledge," Samuel said simply. "It's memory. Like when you remember your childhood, except my memory goes further back." Brennan leaned forward. "Memory of what, exactly?" "Of walking with him, of seeing his face, of hearing his voice." The Archbishop's expression didn't change, but his hands tightened slightly. "Many people claim to have seen Jesus, in visions, in dreams. What makes yours different?" Samuel closed his eyes. "Because I can tell you things nobody wrote down, like the scar." "What scar?" "On his right side. From when he was a boy, maybe 12 years old. He was helping Joseph in the workshop. A piece of wood slipped, cut him deep. The scar stayed. When Thomas touched his wounds, he also saw that scar. That's when he really believed, because scars don't lie." Archbishop Brennan's breath caught. In 50 years of theological study, he'd never encountered this detail, and yet it made perfect sense. The humanness of it, the realness. "Professor," Brennan said quietly, not taking his eyes off Samuel, "I think we need Johns Hopkins." Johns Hopkins Hospital, 2 miles away, was one of the world's premier medical research institutions. In the Department of Neuroscience, a team was being assembled. Dr. Sarah Coleman, 52, a linguist specializing in ancient Semitic languages. Dr. Rebecca Hartman, 48, a child psychologist with expertise in memory and cognitive development. Dr. Marcus Chen, 56, an archaeologist from the Smithsonian, brought in as a historical consultant. And leading the team, Dr. David Reynolds, 44, head of the neuroscience department. An atheist, a skeptic, a man who'd spent his career debunking paranormal claims. When Archbishop Brennan called, Reynolds had laughed. A child speaking Aramaic? Sure, I've seen people speak in tongues. It's glossolalia, random syllables that sound exotic. Bring him in. I'll need 3 hours to expose this. Now in the sterile examination room, Samuel sat in a chair too large for him, electrodes attached to his small head. Rose stood in the corner, arms crossed, protective. Dr. Coleman began. Samuel, I'm going to play some sounds. I want you to tell me if you recognize them. She played recordings. Hebrew, Greek, Latin, various Arabic dialects. Samuel listened politely, shook his head to each one. Then she played a reconstruction, 1st century Galilean Aramaic, painstakingly recreated by scholars from ancient texts. Samuel's face lit up. Yes, that's it. That's how they talked. Coleman's hands trembled. She played another phrase. Samuel responded, fluently, naturally, in the same dialect. The linguist turned to her colleagues, her face pale. That's impossible. This dialect is only known to maybe 50 scholars worldwide. There's no way. Dr. Reynolds cut in, his voice sharp. Let's try the fMRI. I want to see his brain activity. The functional MRI took 45 minutes. Samuel lay still in the massive machine while it scanned his neural patterns. Dr. Hartman, the psychologist, asked him questions. Samuel, can you describe what you see when you have these memories? Samuel's voice, amplified through speakers. I see a room, stone walls, 12 men sitting, Jesus in the center. They're eating bread. He's talking about the Holy Spirit. On the monitors, Dr. Reynolds watched Samuel's brain activity with growing unease. The regions lighting up. The temporal lobe, the prefrontal cortex. These were areas associated with genuine episodic memory, not fabrication. And there was something else. Patterns consistent with mystical experiences, transcendent states, but in a 5-year-old. This doesn't make sense, Reynolds muttered. Dr. Chen, the archaeologist, leaned forward. Ask him about the cave, the 11th appearance. Where exactly was it? Dr. Hartman relayed the question. Samuel's response. Near Bethany, east of Jerusalem, a small cave used for storage. There was a large stone, shaped like a face almost. That's how you'd recognize it. And inside, on the left wall, there were 3 oil lamps. Chen's face went white. He pulled out his phone, scrolled frantically through photos. 3 months ago, an excavation near Bethany had uncovered exactly such a cave. The stone, the lamps, the details matched perfectly. How could he know this? Chen whispered. We haven't published yet. Nobody outside the team knows. Dr. Reynolds stood abruptly. I need to speak with this child, alone. 5 minutes. Archbishop Brennan objected, but Rose, surprisingly, nodded. Let him. I want to see what he'll say. In a private office, Dr. Reynolds sat across from Samuel. Just the two of them. The scientist leaned forward, his voice hard. Listen, kid. I don't know what game you're playing, who's coaching you, but I'm going to figure it out. I always do. Samuel looked at him calmly. You're angry. I'm a scientist. I don't like being lied to. I'm not lying, Dr. Reynolds. And you're not angry at me. You're angry at yourself. Reynolds froze. Excuse me. For what happened with your brother before he died. The room temperature seemed to drop. Reynolds' face lost all color. What did you just say? Samuel's voice was gentle, compassionate beyond his years. You had a fight. About money. about your father's inheritance. You said terrible things. And 2 weeks later, he had the car accident. You never got to apologize. You carry that every day. You think if you'd just forgiven him, if you just called... Dr. Reynolds' hands were shaking. Nobody knows that. Nobody. I never told anyone. Jesus asked Peter the same thing. Samuel continued softly. Not, do you love me? That was easy. The hard question was, can you forgive yourself? Because that's what stops us. Not God's forgiveness. He already gave that. It's forgiving ourselves. Tears streamed down Reynolds' face. This hardened skeptic, this atheist scientist, broke. How? He whispered. How do you know? Because I was there when he asked it, and I saw Peter's face, the same pain that's on yours right now. 20 minutes later, Dr. Reynolds emerged from the office. His colleagues looked at him with concern. His eyes were red, his composure shattered. Doctor? Dr. Coleman asked gently. Are you all right? Reynolds looked at Archbishop Brennan, then at Samuel, then back to his team. I've spent 20 years debunking paranormal claims. I've exposed frauds, fake psychics, deluded mystics. I came here expecting to do the same. He paused, his voice breaking. I have no scientific explanation for this child, the linguistic patterns, the brain activity, the historical knowledge, and something else. Something I can't measure with instruments. This boy knows things he shouldn't know. About me, about everything. Archbishop Brennan stood. What are you saying, Doctor? I'm saying... Reynolds took a shaky breath. I'm saying I believe him. Outside, news vans were already gathering. Somehow word had leaked. By evening, the story would be everywhere. 5-year-old claims to remember Jesus' 40 lost days. In Baltimore, at Johns Hopkins Hospital, a team of scientists sat in stunned silence. In Williamsburg, phones were ringing off the hook at Bruton Parish Church. And in Rome, at the Vatican, an urgent call was being placed. Your Eminence, we have a situation in America. A child. You need to see this immediately. Cardinal Raymond Foster, skeptical investigator for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, picked up his phone and listened. When the call ended, he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he stood, pulled his red Beretta from its stand, and said to his assistant, Book me a flight to Baltimore. Tonight. Cardinal Raymond Foster arrived at Baltimore Washington International Airport on a red-eye flight. He was 58 years old, lean and sharp-eyed, with the bearing of a man who'd spent 3 decades investigating alleged miracles for the Vatican. He'd exposed hundreds of frauds, bleeding statues that were really leaking pipes, stigmata that were self-inflicted wounds, miracle healings that were simply misdiagnosed conditions. He expected this to be no different. Archbishop Brennan met him at the Basilica at 6 a.m. They sat in the Archbishop's study, dawn light filtering through stained glass. Your Eminence, Brennan began. I know how this sounds, but I've seen the brain scans. I've heard the linguistic analysis. Dr. Reynolds, a committed atheist, is now questioning everything he believed. Cardinal Foster's expression remained neutral. I've heard remarkable stories before, Michael. They always have an explanation. Then explain how a 5-year-old speaks 1st century Aramaic. Explain how he describes archaeological sites discovered 3 months ago. Explain how he knew details about Dr. Reynolds' dead brother that nobody else knew. The Cardinal was silent for a moment. I'd like to meet this child. Alone. At 9 a.m. in a private chapel, Cardinal Foster sat across from Samuel. Just the two of them, morning light streaming through windows, the smell of candles and old stone. Samuel, the Cardinal began, his voice measured. Do you know who I am? You're from Rome. You check if people are telling the truth about God. That's correct, and I've found that most people aren't. They're confused or deceived or lying. Which are you? Samuel looked at him steadily. None of those. I'm just remembering. Remembering what? His face? His voice? The way he smiled even when he was sad. Because he loved them so much, even though he knew what was coming. The cardinal leaned back. Many people claim to have visions of Christ. What makes yours real? I can tell you about the scars. You mentioned this to the archbishop, the childhood wound. Not just that one. Samuel's voice grew softer. There were others. Small ones. From living, from being human. A burn on his left hand from helping his mother with cooking when he was young. A scar on his knee from falling as a child. When he rose from the dead, those scars remained. Because resurrection doesn't erase our wounds. It transforms them. It shows us that we can be whole even with our scars. Cardinal Foster felt something crack in his carefully constructed skepticism. This theology, this profound understanding, couldn't come from a child's imagination. Why you? He asked quietly. Why would God choose a 5-year-old child in Virginia? Samuel smiled sadly. Because adults stop listening. Their heads are too full of books and rules and fears. But children can still see with their hearts, and God always preferred to speak through the small ones because small ones aren't afraid to tell the truth. The cardinal stood, walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. 58 years old, 30 years serving the church. And a child was teaching him about faith. Samuel, he said without turning, if what you say is true, what's the message? Why now? Why reveal these things in 2010? Samuel's voice carried across the chapel. Because dark days are coming. Days when people will doubt everything, truth, goodness, whether love matters at all. And in those days, you need to remember, a man named Jesus walked this earth, felt pain, had doubts, and still chose to love. That's the lesson, that even in doubt, even in pain, we can choose love. Cardinal Foster turned, and there were tears on his face. Who are you, child? I'm just Samuel, a little boy who remembers something beautiful, and soon I'll forget. That's okay. The words will stay with the people who heard them. That's enough. By noon, the media storm had erupted. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, satellite trucks lined the streets outside the basilica. The story was everywhere. Vatican investigates child who claims to remember Jesus. Inside, Archbishop Brennan made a decision. Rose, Samuel, and Professor Mitchell needed to return to Williamsburg. The attention was too intense, too dangerous for a small child. That evening, they slipped out a side entrance and drove through the night back to Virginia. When they arrived at Rose's small house, there were reporters on the lawn, cameras, shouting questions. Rose held Samuel close, rushed inside, locked the door. This is madness, she whispered, pulling curtains closed. They're treating him like some kind of circus act. Professor Mitchell, exhausted, sat heavily. It'll die down, these things always do. But it didn't. For weeks, the house was under siege. Letters arrived by the hundreds, some calling Samuel a prophet, others calling him a demon. Rose stopped answering the phone. Samuel stayed inside, playing with his toys, watching cartoons, seemingly unbothered by the chaos outside. 6 months passed. October 2010, Samuel's 6th birthday. The media had moved on to other stories. The letters had stopped. Life had returned to something resembling normal. Rose baked a small chocolate cake, invited Professor Mitchell and Father Thomas. No one else. Just the 4 of them in the small living room, birthday candles flickering. Make a wish, sweetheart, Rose said. Samuel closed his eyes, blew out the candles. And in that moment, something changed. Something subtle, like a light dimming. Archbishop Brennan, who'd driven down from Baltimore, arrived an hour later. He'd brought a gift, a small wooden cross. Samuel, he said gently, kneeling to the boy's level. Do you remember me? Samuel looked at him, smiled. Yes, you're the man from the big church. in Baltimore. Do you remember what we talked about? Samuel's face scrunched in concentration. We talked about something important, but I can't remember what. It's like a dream I had once, but it's fuzzy now. Brennan's heart sank and soared at the same time. Do you remember, Jesus, the things you told us? I remember. I had some strange dreams about a man in white. But that's all. Just dreams. Rose's hand went to her mouth. Father Thomas closed his eyes in silent prayer. Professor Mitchell looked away. The child had forgotten, just as he'd said he would. God chose me to speak, Samuel had told them, not to remember. 15 years later. March 2025. Sam Bennett, now 20 years old, sat in a coffee shop near the University of Virginia campus. Architecture textbooks spread before him, a half-finished cappuccino cooling beside his laptop. He was tall now, lean with kind eyes and an easy smile. A normal college student with normal concerns, exams, his girlfriend Emma, whether he could afford new shoes. His phone buzzed. An email. Dear Mr. Bennett, you're cordially invited to speak at the Vatican Conference on Childhood Mystical Experiences. Your case from 2010 remains one of the most documented and unexplained phenomena in modern religious history. We hope you'll share your perspective. Travel and accommodations provided. Sam stared at the email. He'd been 10 when he'd finally Googled his own name, found the articles, watched the old news footage. A small boy speaking in strange languages, scientists looking baffled, priests crying. He had no memory of it. None. Just what others had told him, what he'd read online. But sometimes, rarely, he'd feel something, a warmth in his chest, the sense of having done something important, something meaningful, even if he couldn't remember what. He clicked reply and typed, I'll come. Rome, April 2025. Sam stood before 200 scholars, theologians, and scientists. They'd spent 2 days analyzing his case, the brain scans, the linguistic evidence, the archaeological confirmations. Everything checked out. Nothing was explained. Now they wanted to hear from him. Sam stepped to the microphone, looked at the sea of faces. I don't remember what I said when I was 5. I don't remember speaking Aramaic or describing Jesus' wounds or any of it. But I remember how I felt. I felt loved, like I was wrapped in something so big and warm that it couldn't fit in my chest. And even though I can't remember the words, that feeling stayed. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not meant to carry these experiences forever. Maybe we're just meant to deliver the message and then live. Just live. Love people. Be kind. That's enough. We don't all have to be prophets or saints. We just have to be human. Broken, scarred, beautiful humans trying our best. The auditorium was silent. An elderly woman in the front row, Dr. Sarah Coleman, now 67, the linguist who'd tested him 15 years ago, stood with tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. You changed my life. You taught me that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be experienced. That night, Sam walked alone through Rome. St. Peter's Square was empty, lit by street lamps. He sat on the steps, looked up at the ancient dome, and felt that warmth again, that presence. And though no words came, no visions, no memories, he understood. You did well. Now just live. Love. I'm always with you. Sam smiled, tears on his cheeks, and whispered to the night, Thank you. Somewhere in Williamsburg, Virginia, in a small graveyard beside Bruton Parish Church, a tombstone read, Rose Bennett, 1937-2023. She protected an angel. And in Baltimore, in the Basilica's archives, a sealed file contained voice recordings, brain scans, testimonies from dozens of witnesses. labeled simply the Bennett case, unexplained. But the real legacy wasn't in files or headlines or scientific papers. It was in the hearts of everyone who'd heard a small boy speak about love being stronger than fear, about forgiveness being harder than faith, about God speaking through the most unlikely voices. The message had been delivered, and that was enough.